Hey there guys, and welcome back. So I have us up on the demo page. First we'll go ahead and take a look at where we're at, and then we will discuss what exactly happened. So here we are. Map looks absolutely normal. I've got the console up on the right hand side, the inspect tool up on the right hand side, just so that we can look at things to make sure that they're working in just a minute. Obviously this stuff is going to look all normal to you. Grab that, and I just need that for what's about to happen. So the S sign, as you may remember, the $sign, is the symbol for our planets in this game, or I'm sorry, the stations, not the planets. The planets are the dungeons. So therefore the stations went onto the $sign, and now we have this opening text. You happen upon a station. You dock with it to see how its inhabitants are faring. And then, as you can see, we go immediately into another encounter. And this encounter is, in theory, randomly generated. It's added on after we click the continue button on the previous screen, so it's not even generated beforehand. It's generated at the time that it's necessary. Now, over here, I forgot to take this debug code out. This was not actually the code I was looking to show you. But if we examine the screen right here, you'll see that you come across a trader willing to exchange scrap for batteries. So I'm going to go ahead and really quick hit, actually we don't have that in here, that would be on .resources. There we go. So our resources currently are 10 scrap. That's resource number 2. ID 2 is scrap. So we have 10 scrap and we have 4 batteries. So if I click this trade 5 scrap for 5 batteries, the trader happily does business with you and gives you some especially high quality batteries. Go ahead and come back in here. Now we have 9 batteries and 5 scrap. So that trade obviously went through just fine. I'm gonna hit the continue and we're done. So that is to where we got to with the station so far. And first off, you'll notice that that was a choice encounter. We have not had a choice encounter. That's something I implemented this time. That was technically something we defined in code before, but I never filled it out. I never worked out how it worked and implemented it in the GUI. So that is now officially implemented. I'm going to go ahead and restart the demo, F5, and we'll run through that one more time. Again, I'm coming here to pick up scrap. Now you understand why I come here, because we need some scrap to trade. So we get our scrap here. And then we'll hop up here. And again, in the demo, the events are not randomly generated. They are consistent, so therefore we're back to the trader. So, as you will recall, 4 and 10. Now I'm going to take this option that says trade 10 scrap for 50 batteries. Which seems like a deal, right? Up here we're 1 to 1. This is 1 to 5. The trader takes your scrap and says he'll be right back with your scrap batteries. You never see him again. Come over here. Resources 4 and 0. So that was a fun little thing I put in there. And then just to finish off the demo, just so that we're all on the same page. And actually I did not have to come in here, but we'll kill this guy really quick. I was just going to show you what the basically no trade button does. Again, don't necessarily need this scrap, but continue, and if we do hit do not trade, we just move on to the next event, which again, next encounter rather. The next encounter is not yet programmed into the demo, so we just exit out. And that is everything we got done. If we come over here, just for the record, just to make sure everything is hunky-dory, 4 batteries, 10 scrap, that's what we started up with before the trade. So obviously skipping the trade does not change your resources. And that is everything. So let's go ahead and look at the GitHub. All right, so as you can see in the GitHub, I went a little bit over. Basically, in getting all that sorted out, I ended up with over an hour, because honestly, I actually had it done at 7:15ish, maybe a minute or two after 7:15, but it was more or less exactly 7:15. I had all my code written. But I wanted to be able to give you guys the demo this time. So I started debugging, and it ended up taking over an hour to actually get all the bugs ironed out. So one of those things, we're up to a 3-hour session this time, not that big of a deal. It's not, 6 hours. So, but that is what happened. We went over because I was debugging and making sure that the demo was functional. So we're going to hop into VS Code. Well, you're going to hop into VS Code. I'm going to keep GitHub up on my screen. And we'll go ahead and look at the changes, assuming that it stops snapping back to the wrong screen. There we go. All right. So, let's see. I need to figure out... All right, I'm going to hit this one really, really quick just because it is a very minor change. This happened during debugging, but I realized that down here in... Right here, down here in the events, I realized I missed a break right here, so I copy and pasted, but I didn't paste the break. So the station symbol actually was running into the dungeon symbol, which is how switch cases work. If you don't put the break in, it runs over into the next case. And therefore, event type was getting overwritten to leave dungeon, which means that we're only getting the leave enter dungeon. It happened to both up here and down there. So we were only ever getting enter and leave dungeon. We were never getting enter and leave station. Again, very minor typo. Easy to get out of the way. Now, more importantly, let's see. Where is... the first thing I did in the first hour? I'm trying to find. So this is funny, all right? I see one thing that I recall doing in the first hour, but it's possible that a lot of the stuff I did in the first hour is also contained in... Yeah, you know what? Okay. So a lot of the stuff was stuff that we'll end up going through in the second hour anyway, so this is going to be another one of those topical ones. So, very quickly, since this is going to be another typo, we can go into combat. Combat, this one was actually debugged in the first hour. So, you recall that we separated off everything, right? We've been separating off stuff to make them independent of anything else, right? So this .use weapons and items, I missed the binds on. You recall how I mentioned last time how down here I had to keep on doing .bind because they're events. So I missed the bind there, and then also up here in the stat block. Actually, it wasn't the stat block, was it? Oh, this .build stat block. Okay, so it was actually down here where we actually use this. I missed this right here. I forgot to add this .build stat block. That was still looking for the global or local stat block as opposed to the stat block on the combat GUI. So that again is a minor detail taken care of. And now, which one do we go with? What change do we go with next? Basically, I guess we're going to start out with the changes to encounters. All of this, again, kind of gets all mixed up, which is why we can't really do it chronologically. But, important thing to note, as part of our effort to separate the code, even though, again, I'll reiterate, it's fine to have global variables in HTML JavaScript. It's just an accepted practice over here. But I just particularly have decided not to go with that. Therefore, let's see, where are we at? There's encounter. Therefore, I did not add the text in here, but actually I should be able to grab it from up here. First off, I made this master list of encounter options, so I defined a type def encounter options just to have reference to it. But game is now required as an option. It used to be optional as an option because we used to be able to supply game into an encounter. I decided not to do that. I decided that now whenever you create the encounter, you have to provide game. And then it just adds this.options.game instead. So all these in encounters took the game out and then referenced this.game or this.options.game. Changed this.game references to this.options.game instead, wherever that happened to pop up. There were a couple places throughout the code here where we referenced this.game. So let's see. This dot options dot rewards. I'm just trying to find an example. And now I'm not finding the example. So, yeah, it's one of those things. Parse rewards. Where do we use that? Result equals. Hold on. Control F. Parse rewards. Okay, there you go. This dot options dot game. There we go. So that's one of the places where I had to change this from this dot game to this dot options dot game. Easy peasy. Next up, choice encounter. Let's see. Did I actually have any of this code right here? Let me check. Load. This is the GUI. My bad. Other GitHub page. Scrolling. Okay, no. This actually was another case where this dot option that game had to be provided instead of this dot game, but that was all written, it looks like, at the time of last session. So for the moment, we're going to be done with this. I'm going to come back to this in a minute when we start talking about the GUI. So I'm going to just save that quick paste I did for the dot game. When we start talking about the GUI, then I'll come back over here and finish the one last thing that we need to talk about over here. Let's see. All right, so I believe I will move on to, because that is where it comes up next, the map demo. Map demo, we were working on this stuff, right? You should remember this stuff from last time. And if I scroll down here to build station, this is what I was working on. And let me just double check right here. I think all this is new. Yeah, okay, it looks like all this is new. So let me see. Okay, that's what happened. Got it. So I knew I had some of this last session, but I wasn't sure why I wasn't seeing it in the changelog. So a lot of this code, I refactored this code up here. So inside of build next segment, we had a branch on floor, the floor and tier, okay? And I broke that up, and instead of having the branch on floor and tier and then checking on each floor / tier what the event type was, I just did it once here and then subbed out to these functions. So I just basically copied and pasted what we had up here down here and then proceeded to program it to fill out what we needed. So first off, I want to say we had this last time. We did. Yes, so we had this last time. So you can see here, this is an example of, now we just have if floor 0 with no branch between event types here. And instead we have this message right here. And if we scroll down to dungeon, we have this message right here. So these are now separate. And then the rest of this should all be new. And I'm pretty sure that is the case. Actually, I can check right here. Yes, all that is new. We did not actually do the choice. Not that right here, the choice encounter. We did not actually have this choice encounter defined last time. So now I can start talking about this, because as you can see, I have references to EncounterSequence. And up here I have, instead of let encounter, which is what we had if I had copied and pasted from up here, I now have EncounterSequence. Basically what happened and what prompted the major change is I wrote this all out, and when I got to this callback, I realized or not this callback necessarily, but this part right here, I realized I had a serious issue. So follow with me through the code. So first off, I wrote encounter equals new encounter, choice encounter. Game obviously is game, message, come across trader, set out my choices, which you can see right here. If you recall, I believe we did have the choice encounter, this part of the choice encounter defined over encounters.js in scripts. So you should be familiar with how exactly choices are supposed to be laid out. And then we have the exit button text, the on exit, remember, is going to be build next segment. On exit is build next segment. That way we recurse to the next segment of the journey. And then I said callback is going to be this trader callback. So I wrote all that, good enough. And I said encounter equals that. You'll recall this let was not here because we had encounter defined at the top, because each build station would create a new encounter. That was the idea. Obviously, that had to change for a reason. And that reason should become apparent as we come up here and look at the trader callback. So on the trader callback, we're going to, this is the callback function because we're creating a callback encounter, right? So all this does is modify the player's resources for the trade. Determines how exactly the trade is going down. If the value is 10, if we're trying to rip the guy off, then player gets absolutely nothing and loses everything. Basically what that code says. Easy enough, right? And then easy enough, everything else, just, we define our message here depending on what the value is and create the callback. Again, no problems. It doesn't look like there's any problems here. The problem arises at this point where we have this encounter sitting around, but we can't return this encounter back to build next segment because we're not inside of build station. We're inside of this callback, trader callback. So this is happening basically asynchronously, and we have no reference to sequence in order to put this onto the sequence stack in order to resolve it. So since we have no way to resolve it, that kind of causes a problem. My first idea was just very simple, add sequence in here, and sequence would just have to be carried throughout all the code. And yo, yikes, nice to meet you. And sequence would have to be carried throughout all the code, and then we'd have to deal with the ramifications of that, right? Well, I didn't particularly like that. So this is what we ended up with. As you can see, I decided to change it to an encounter sequence. That way, this whole entire build station, instead of returning just a single encounter, returns its own encounter sequence. Well, that makes things easy because since it's defining the encounter sequence inside of this scope, we always have a reference for it. We never have to pass around the reference. So again, easy enough. However, that does create a problem eventually because at some point this encounter sequence that we created has to go back to build segment. And build segment's going to get it, and then it's going to have to do something with it. Whoops, scroll too far. There it is. No. There we go. Build segment. So we get this sequence back from either of these functions, and then we got to do something with it. So the first thing I did was hop over to encounters, and inside of EncounterSequence, I added extend sequence. So if we get an encounter sequence, we can just we can just extend that sequence onto our stack. The problem I realized is that doesn't actually fix our problem because, actually scroll back down. Oh no, they're GUI. There we go. Oh no, we're in map demo. Derp, 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 derp. That doesn't actually fix our problem because again, that does not forward or back propagate a reference to the encounter when it gets added. Now, I had an option at that point. Whenever we add an encounter to an encounter sequence, we could assign the sequence to the encounter. That would be a valid fix to it. I thought that, that may be the answer. However, obviously, if you've been following along, that is pretty clearly not what happened. If that was what happened, I probably would not have had so many things to work out. Instead, what I decided to go with is... So right now, this is actually not being used at all, extend sequence. I'm just leaving it in here because. Instead, what I decided to do was modify increment. You will recall that increment used to literally just look like... I guess that, yes. Used to just look like this. Increment the index and then return this .encounters.index. That used to be all that it was. Obviously, we have a lot more code in here. And the reason for that is I decided that it would be useful more moving forward to allow for subsequences. So because we are now allowing for subsequences, how we handle the adding count, well, yeah, this ends up being a problem later on. I'll get to that in just a second. But how we handle increment and how we handle get has to change. So now, whenever we call get, we actually need to check whether what we're getting at that index is an encounter or an encounter sequence. If it's an encounter sequence, we don't want to return the encounter sequence. We want to return the current index of that encounter sequence. So that much is actually easy, right? That much is, well, first off, I had to put this, it turns out, in here because, again, we start out at -1 index. So I realized that in some situations, we were throwing a error because we're at -1 index, and get was returning, and then we were trying to check the constructor on undefined. So this was undefined because it was -1 index, and then we were calling .constructor, and obviously that does not work. So had to throw this check in right here really quick to fix that one. However, point being, is now we need a lot of catches right here because, again, this first one, we need to check whether or not we're at the very end of the sequence, because obviously we can't check constructor.name if we're at the very end of the sequence. So if we're at the very end of the sequence, then we just return the result, which is undefined. And then we got to first check whether or not we're past -1. And then we got to check if we have an encounter sequence. If we do have an encounter sequence and we're not at -1, well, this -1 comes first just because we can't call, again, constructor at -1. So that's why this is here. So if we do have an encounter sequence, we call increment on the encounter sequence. The encounter sequence may not have any encounters in it, or it may be at the end of the encounter sequence, like we were previously up here. So we got to then check the result of the encounter sequence. And actually it occurs to me that we should have in here, and this was, again, a really quick, does not equal. Again, I was running super late with this update today, so missed that one. So we need to make sure that result is not undefined right here. And if that is the case, then we can go ahead and return result. You'll notice that result, if we call, if our subsequence, if the result right here, which is our subsequence, calls increment, and its current increment is a subsequence itself, then it actually will call increment. So that chain will propagate all the way to either an encounter or undefined/null. So for that reason, we don't have to, after calling this, again, check whether or not we are getting an encounter sequence. We are guaranteed not to have an encounter sequence at this point in time. So again, so long as it's valid, it returns the result. Otherwise, if it's not valid, if our subsequence is no longer a sequence with encounters in it, now we can go ahead and increment our own index and check what that is. Again, we're checking what that is because that could be undefined, and we don't want to check constructor on that for obvious reasons. And then we repeat the process because now we've got a new index, and that new index has a new subsequence, and that new subsequence now has to check it now has to increment its own subsequence, because if this is a brand new subsequence, it starts at -1. So if it starts at -1, then it needs to go to 0, or if we had already gotten the sequence, if it is starting midway through its subsequence, rather, is what I was trying to say there, then whatever index it's at presumably already ran, because we don't increment after a sequence run, we increment before the next sequence runs. So for that reason, we need to call result.increment again. And finally, we can return result. Because, now this is actually a little bit of, this maybe is going to have to get fixed. And the reason is if we put an empty subsequence in here, then we actually will. So basically, if our sequence tree looks like this, and I'm just going to do pseudocode, sequence, this is an empty sequence, event. Actually, I should say encounter. And actually, I probably don't need this one to demonstrate. Yeah, I shouldn't need that one to demonstrate. So if this is how our current sequence tree looks, right? So we have a sequence, we increment to the first subsequence, and that subsequence is empty, then right here we'll return undefined. We'll return undefined right here. Unfortunately, that means that we never actually get to here, because when the program gets the undefined further up the tree, when it gets the result of this as undefined, it's not going to try to increment this sequence again. And therefore, since it doesn't try to increment the sequence again, we'll never actually get to this encounter. So technically speaking, that's going to have to be fixed. However, that really should never come up. That is a bug that shouldn't really come up in practice. So it's one of those things. I'll put a to-do here, but it may not need to be fixed. May have to, whoops, that is not what I was trying to do. To-do, may have to recurse again if empty subsequence is supplied. All right, there we go. So there's my to-do. So that is all the crap that I had to deal with in order to get the subsequences working, which again was required for any encounter, really. It's, in this case, it's the choice encounter that's giving us the problems, because the choice encounter creates its own multi-sequence process. But if we have more encounters in the future that do a similar thing, then in that case, you know, this will also be useful. So now we can nest sequences, and that has benefits for other reasons too. I don't know that they'll ever actually come up in game, but just in case we decide to implement other reasons for branching event sequences, that is already built into the pie right now. Baked into the pie, built into the system, etc., etc., etc. So that is, you know, where we're at right now. That is that major change that, again, took up a lot of my time this session. So let us see. What else can we talk about? What other changes do we got? Honestly, probably not much, because, again, that was... Oh, yes. Yes, no. Yes, no. Yes. Yes, 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 yes. Let me... Before I talk about this one, let me just double check in encounters that I did not miss anything else. Not in encounters. We already talked about combat. Yeah, that's where I'm going next. And then map, readme parser. We're not talking about readme parser. Again, that's just a minor thing. All right, so yes, this is the next big thing. So, I mean, and this is the last thing, honestly. Over here, we used to have something called update sequence. If I scroll down, that used to be right here, right underneath cycle event, because it used to be part of cycle event. We used to have cycle event, and then I broke cycle event up into cycle event and update sequence so that they were two separate functions. So, first off, I had to add this code in here because I reorganized things. Basically what happened was the encounter was not getting cleared. So when we called the port encounter and there's the port event. When we called the, oh, I'm sorry, not the port event. Where's it at? Update, no, not that one. Huh, 1 second. Let me use this really quick. Oh, come on, give me the drop down. Visit colony, there we go. When we did visit colony, you'll recall that we used get or add encounter right here. So because we were not clearing the encounter at this point because of all the changes we made and setting it to null, we would add this encounter onto the stack, and this encounter then would not actually fire because we were never calling cycle event. So for that reason, we now make sure that if we don't have any more encounters, which again, one of the changes to update sequence GUI is now it returns the encounter and the encounter options that were provided. Just, I figure that's useful. So if not encounter, now we make sure to clear the game's encounter because we no longer have a sequence we're cycling through right here. We are no longer cycling through the sequence. So that is the first change. The second is, as you can see, update sequence GUI got moved to encounter GUI. And we are passing in cleanup encounter and cleanup combat, because those things have references to game. So the second I moved it over to Encounters GUI, I wanted to remove all global references. So for that reason, these things update travel resources, obviously do things over, well, first off, since it's right here, cleanup combat, game.combat, you know, all of this stuff is game specific. Now, it may be useful to copy all this over instead of saying game.combat. It may be useful to say counter.combat instead, and copy this over for use other places. Again, that may happen in the future. It was not necessary to happen right now. However, in update travel resources, game.mat.getMap. So as you can see, I'm sorry. I was going to say, that does not sound right. Where is travel resources? F12. All right, there we go. So we have all these references in update travel resources to game, and this is all front end code. So since this is all front end code, we're not particularly worried. We don't particularly want it in the back end code that is GUI/encounters.js. So once it came over here, then obviously we made our changes. First off, now that this is separate code, the cleanup part of the update sequence GUI has to be implemented over here. So we have to actually do event box and combat box dot add and remove show hidden in order for this code to function properly, because those used to be in cleanup combat and cleanup encounter. So we cut those out, pasted those into here, and then as you can see, I just labeled these functions up here to make it easier. That way I didn't have to keep on repasting code, and otherwise they get put in at the same exact spot as they were before. So those are those changes there. And obviously now this is the other change. You have to provide sequence because we no longer have a reference to game. So now at this line used to be game.encounter.get. Well, now you need to provide us with the sequence because we have no idea what game is. So there was that change. And let me go ahead and look at the GitHub. See if there were anything else. Oh, well, I'm not going to be able to tell because, again, this was all pasted in here and therefore it's not going to have a change log. So, yeah, I guess that is it. Okay, actually, that's not it. I forgot. We did not have load choice before. So I thought that was the last thing, but we didn't actually have this code to display the choice on the screen. So this is going to be the last thing. My bad. This actually should have been gone over. I should have gone over this a lot earlier. So this is the code we're using to display choice encounters. So as you can see, obviously we have all our properties up here we need for a choice encounter. Load choice obviously follows the same naming convention as everything else. Well, not everything else, but all the simple events. We clear just like always. We set out the buttons just like always. No big deal. We insert the main code and then format stuff. So down here we format the encounter, the event exit button, and add the callback. We add that down here just because that's in order, because that's at the bottom of the screen. And otherwise, for the choice, we have a message, and then we have a table, which is the choice table. And inside the choice table will go all the options. Easy enough. So we grab a reference to our table, obviously table body, because that's where you're supposed to put stuff. And as you can see right here, I'm using the modulo right here of 2. That way we lay things out in 2 columns. If you want to do 2 rows, then this would be math.floor I/2, I divided by 2. That would be how you do 2 rows evenly distributed, but we want 2 columns because that looks better. So choice is obviously choice is I because we're iterating over choices, easy enough. And we go ahead and insert into actually, where is, oh, that's right, sorry. I did not complete this line right here. I did not complete explaining this line right here. So, if we are at 0, if I modulo 2 is 0, so that would be 0, 2, 4, 6. So for every even number, including 0, we need to start a new row because the table is laid out in rows, not column. If it was laid out in column, then we could do this a little differently, but HTML tables are laid out in rows instead. So whenever we get to a new row, we lay out a new row. And then we go ahead and add a button to the end of the row. For 0, this is going to be the first button. For 1, this is going to be the second button. For 2, this is going to be the first button. For 3, this is going to be the second button, etc., etc., etc. Next up, we go ahead and grab the button, add the callback on it, and inside of the callback, we pass the value. I'm not 100% sure that this is the best way to do it. I'm half tempted. So obviously we have the value stored on the choice. We have the value stored on the choice because the code is not necessarily going to know what the function is. So the callback function, I should say, or no, callback object rather. The object for the choice is what I should say. That is obviously generated when the code is initially executed. And for that reason, it's going to have a unique memory ID, so to say, each and every single time. So we need some way to identify which of all the possible choice options across all choice encounters this choice actually is. And for that reason, we have value. So again, that's the purpose of the value. However, I'm not sure if it wouldn't be more useful to just pass the choice object in here and then have the code that is checking for the value just check choice.value itself. That seems to me like it would probably be more useful, but I haven't thought of a good reason why that is necessary yet. In theory, the code on the other end that handles the callback for selecting that choice, in theory, that code should be able to figure out everything else about that choice just based on its value. So for that reason, I'm not sending over choice. I'm not doing callback choice. I'm doing callback choice.value. Again, but it may be the wrong call. And frankly, the more I think about it, the more I think it is the wrong call. We're going to leave it like that, though, and I will maybe come back and change that in the future. So for let cost of choice.cost, because now we have to go ahead and figure out what exactly this choice is going to cost us. And if the player cannot pay the cost, then we can't let the player select the option. The player is not allowed to select the option and then go, oops, I'm bankrupt. So first off, we need to figure out whether or not the player has the item or resource available, whatever that may be. And again, this is the code that I forgot to take out right here, just double checking that it was working. So let's take that out now. And if either not available, because again, these two functions will return null if we do not add the true right here. And this true is, what is this true again? It is return empty. That's what the name of the parameter is. Name of parameter is return empty. So if we set return empty to true, then that would return potentially if the player had a resource recorded with 0 quantity. Then we would also have to check if not available, or actually that would still work here. So it wouldn't necessarily matter in this specific case, but it's just, whatever. We actually this would not change at all. However, the point being is that we're not doing that, and it doesn't necessarily matter if we do that. So moving forwards with our lives, if not available or the available quantity is less than the cost quantity, we disable the button and then we break. This break here gets us out of this for loop because we don't need to worry about anything else. We don't have to worry about the rest of the costs, rather. If any one of the costs the player cannot pay, then the player obviously cannot make the exchange at all. So that is the code there. Again, this is just the button setup that you've seen a million times. And down here, show events, event box, etc. That just obviously adds show and removes hidden from the event box. So that is the last of the changes. Let's see what to say next. Honestly, I can't think of much else that is going to need to happen to finish building out the station and the planet. on our demo. The station and the planet both. We don't have any other what do you call them? Any more? Wow. Okay, derp. Any more encounter types? We don't have any more encounter types that we have not implemented yet. So because we don't have any more encounter types that we haven't implemented, we do not need to. We're not going to spend time implementing anything else, which means that it really is just a matter of writing code. It is really just writing the encounters themselves, which is no big deal. I should hopefully have that done in about an hour. Hopefully. One of those things. We'll see what happens. So, expect for the next review to have both the station and the dungeon fully fleshed out so that you can travel through them and clear both of them. And then, assuming that that doesn't take more than an hour, the next hour would be a couple different things. It would be changing the port so that once you clear the port, that would be over here. Let's go ahead and hop over here to the internets. So again, the port is this guy right here. This exclamation point. When you clear this exclamation point, it should turn into a house instead, which is, I believe, the hashtag / shoot. Pound sign. There we go. Pound sign / hashtag symbol. So that would be the next thing after we finish fleshing these two guys out. And then after that point, which again, we may start but probably won't finish. I don't know. It will depend how difficult it is. At that point, we will need to do Fog of War. We'll have to add the Fog of War overlay onto this. And then the demo should be complete. Once Fog of War is implemented, the demo should be complete. I'm not sure that we'll have Fog of War completed by the end of next session. Actually, there's one more thing. The reward for clearing the dungeon is going to be a player upgrade, which I was thinking of making Fog of War vision, increasing the Fog of War vision, since we're going to be doing Fog of War anyway. So that is the game plan for now. Again, that probably is 2 sessions out, is probably where we're at right there, in order to get everything done. The clearing the getting the dungeon and the station, again, dungeon being the planet, getting the planet and the station finished off, hopefully will take an hour. It may take more than an hour, just because it is just a lot of writing is what it is. But once we have, actually, it's not just a lot of writing, because in the dungeon, I want to implement other character types that you can fight, other enemy types rather, because it's a multi-floor combat arena basically. So that, yeah, that probably will take definitely more than an hour. Probably definitely will take more than an hour. So probably, I keep on saying probably, expect that we will not have Fog of War done in the next session. The only caveat to that, the only way that changes, if I sit here and look at the fact that all I did was write encounters for, let's say, 2 hours, I may not decide that that was worth a code review, which frankly is probably correct. So instead, what we may end up with is a 4 or 5 hour session, because so much of it is just dead air basically. It's just filling out the demo as opposed to writing new functioning back end code. So that may be what happens. So there you go. You have your expectations for the next session. As always, I feel pretty good about this. I mean, it's one of those things. Hiccups happen and not that big of a deal. Frankly, an hour to debug the code was not that bad. I mean, honestly, it went by pretty quickly for me on my end. And we are looking at more or less the finish line for the demo, which means that we are very close to having a functioning alpha, because the only difference between this map demo and all the other demos that we've done is basically UI and randomness. So that means that we are getting very, very close to an alpha release. So, I mean, heck, I may even call the completion of the map demo itself the alpha release, because the alpha release will give you access to all the different systems inside the game. Independent systems, game systems, game mechanics. It will give you access to all the different game mechanics, which means that I could, in theory, just call that the alpha. And then at that point, as you may recall, the second that the alpha is available, then I just go ahead and post the GitHub link so you can start following the changes there. Not saying that I won't do code reviews. We'll still do code reviews as we complete the game itself. But all I'm saying right here is that I am getting kind of hyped. This is very exciting that we are finally getting towards the end. I mean, not exciting that it's going to be over necessarily, and not like I'm grinding through this or anything like that, but completing a goal that you started. What was this? Hold on. Let's look at the GitHub. Pull GitHub up. README. Oh, shoot. I can't look at it, GitHub. Never mind. Change gears. VS Code. VS Code, README. Let's see. When did we start this? We can call that September. We'll just call that September. So September, October, November. So we're 2 months into it. 2 full months into it at this point. So yeah, we're 2 full months into it. If we can have this done by the end of December, have this game completed in 3 months, that's pretty great. I'd be really happy about that. Again, when I first started talking about this, I said, yeah, probably more than 40 hours worth of work. Probably we may do up to like 80 hours worth of work. So I don't know where we're at right now. Again, that's what the README parser is for. That will do the math for me once it's done. But I guess we'll find out. Again, I'm not going to bother running. Yeah, I'm going to dedicate and make a declaration here that I will not run the README parser to find out how long I spent on this until the game is actually done. We will save that surprise for the end, both for me and for you. Obviously, if you feel like counting up the hours, that's on you. You probably should do something more useful with your life, but whatever. If you really feel like counting up the hours, have fun, watch the paint dry. Otherwise, this outro is turning into one of my infamous 20-minute outros. So if you have been watching, if you've been sticking through this outro, thank you. And I hope you have a great and wonderful day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're in the world. And I will catch you next time.